Hi, I'm Meg Rye, founder of Good Maven, where we hire and coach the world's designers. One of our goals is to make the design industry more transparent through giving you behind the scenes looks at aspects of our work. Our podcast aims to bring to light what designers, coaches, and recruiters have learned and share it with you. Today, we're exploring the process of hiring a designer with two of my favorite people to work with, Melissa Hajj and Kelly Norris. Melissa, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I've spent the last 25 years, oh my God, of my life, um, both designing software and then building software design teams at places like Apple and Meta, and also some really small and obscure startups that you'll never have heard of, and a medical software company, and kind of all over the map.
Lovely. And Kelly, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Um, a little bit about myself. Right. So I talk a lot. So sorry in advance. Um, I have been in recruiting now for just over 10 years. Interestingly, I started as a designer, more on the print and textile side of things for kind of high-end interior firms. That's a long story of why that didn't work out. But ultimately, I was drawn towards tech. And initially, I had a really great opportunity to work at Microsoft. Big win for me because it was also looking after Microsoft Studios from a gaming standpoint. So I've hired across product design, product management, UX research, all the way through to, again, your Lionhead, Rare, and then Dynamic CRM. So it really is kind of the spectrum of products. That I did for around 2 years. And then I had the pleasure of moving to what was then Facebook, now Meta, where I met the wonderful Meg. I worked at Meta for about 7 years, spanning across growth analytics, data science, and then a full circle moment back to design, where I actually helped scale the international design recruiting team. And that is where I had even more of a pleasure to work with Melissa on some of the very, very complicated and difficult hiring across not just product design, but we also had art, animation, specialist design, and again, full cycle moment because I got to look into a lot of that specialist design, game designers, animators, character artists. And then I took a little bit of a stint away from recruiting to find myself. And then ultimately didn't work out, wanted to come back to recruiting, and hence why I'm now at Good Maven for 6 months now, I think it is, if not a little bit longer. So, hi.
Hello, thank you for that. And just, although I know both of you, when I hear you tell your stories, it's interesting because I see we both sort of started in the arts, although in different ways and sort of brought us to that. So I guess I'm curious for both of you, what attracted you to the arts or the creative industries in the first place?
So when we were talking about doing this podcast together, we discovered the fact that the two of you are both more trained in design and art than I am. My degree is in theater and back of house, so like set design and painting sets and constructing sets. But at the time when I graduated with that degree from the University of Virginia, the first dot-com boom was happening. And there was a stark reality for me on the table, which was that if I wanted to stay in theater, I was looking at probably 2 to 3 years of unpaid or barely paid internships, and sleeping in my parents' basement. And I'm not afraid of insects, but my parents' basement has jumping crickets, like the ones that can jump like 2 or 3 feet. And, the idea of those having a roommate, jumping crickets as a roommate, like that just didn't vibe. And I had also gone to a science and technology high school where I had learned computer science, a bit of coding, C++, also a bunch of HTML. So when I graduated from UVA, I could not only spell HTML and I could also fog a mirror and operate Photoshop. So I was actually overqualified for a job as a web designer. And that got me out of my parents' basement post haste. So it started out as a practical thing, but I discovered that there was a lot about design and web design and software design that was rather similar to what I loved in theatrical design, because you had an audience that you were trying to work for, and you had a thing that you needed to convey or help them do. And you had all these technical constraints, and then there were aesthetics applied on top of it. And those really, those aspects, when you put them together, really fire my brain cells and make me want to get really stuck into a problem to try to solve it. So it ended up being something that I loved, as well as something that was financially feasible.
I noticed that there's this part of like, you know, you're creating something for someone else that comes into it, and the care and thoughtfulness that goes into that. Kelly, I'm curious what attracted you to go from textiles and print into recruiting.
Look, I think the first thing I can say is no one jumps at recruiting as soon as they, you know, I'm growing up as a child, I wanted to be a recruiter. It doesn't happen that way. I think the first thing I wanted to be was a vet, and I soon realized that wasn't going to work for me. But I'd always been creative. I got my energy out by making things and designing things. So I wanted to see that through. That was all. I was very single-minded throughout my entire teenage and then into like early adult years of growing up. I wanted to be a designer, but I only saw one avenue of that, and that was that kind of textiles, because I was very tactile as a person. So yeah, I went to university. I studied printed design and media, specifically for surface design. And unfortunately, it's an industry that it does take a lot from you. It is an incredibly nuanced market where there's not a lot of really successful textile designers that make it. And I think when you're kind of younger, you try and, very similar, Melissa, you learn that you have to take a hit somewhere. So I spent, once I left university, I was from internship to internship for free, just working and giving everything that I had to an industry that wasn't really where it should have been at the time. I was fortunate enough to be taken on from an internship full time. And my role just spanned. It went from being designing custom pieces for interior design agencies, but all the way through to production management, going to the print houses and actually watching them produce the fabrics. And then it went to business relations. I was now working with people, getting to sell and getting to be more of a, you know, account management, office management. And I started realizing that, you know, I taught myself HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I was helping to build out their website. I was doing all of these things that weren't just designing fabrics. And then there was a time where I was even helping them realign their tech stack. So we bought in, at the time it was Office 365 and Dynamics and all of these, like building out a CRM system for our clients. Nothing to do with design. And I started falling in love with the notion of working for a tech company. And some of that is down to just cost of living and the fact that, you know, being in design was not getting me out of my mum's house. Love her to pieces, but there was only so much I could do to live in the same home. I needed my own way out.
No jumping crickets, though?
No,
we did have.
Not in London.
No, big old spiders were my thing, though. It was a very old house, drafty, and a lot of holes in places there shouldn't have been. So for me, it was a change into something where I was growing as a person as well. Like I had all these other interests around tech, and a really, really good friend of mine introduced me to a recruiting director for EMEA at Microsoft. And we kicked it off straight away. And she was like, one way or another, I'm going to find you a role. So I went down the account management route at first. Like, I like people. I like people sometimes. Recruiting, you learn you learn who you are in recruiting, and how you adapt and speak to other people. But part of what I love about recruiting is that management of kind of people and clients and candidates, and that care that it takes. So I interviewed a little bit, and then this role landed, which was actually in recruiting, looking after initially administrative tasks within recruiting. And I thought, why not? It's completely different. It's completely outside of my comfort zone, but sometimes you have to take that leap. And I took the role, found out that not only was that role, it changed everything for me. I then took the initiative to push towards being a sourcer, a role that I'd never heard of in my life. I didn't know what a talent sourcer was.
Sounds magical.
It's
sorcery.
Sorcery. Yeah, I was, honestly, it does feel like magic sometimes, pulling candidates out of what feels like thin air, but it's hours and hours of work. And it was in an industry that I really liked as well. I still got to find designers, but for games. For me, that was perfect. So I still got to keep part of who I was in that creative element. And yes, I dabbled. I went to engineering. I worked on growth and analytics and marketing and anything in between. But I still kept that creative element. And I think when you get to work with product, and whether it be product management or product design, you're still thinking about how does this affect people? And when you look at design, the biggest part of that is how does it affect people? What am I creating? What am I building that is for people? So yeah, it's, sorry, long-winded. But I think, would I go back to design? Maybe. But I do also love the ability to be creative within recruiting. It's a whole different way of working. And now I get to hire designers. So. And I know what things mean. I think this is wonderful thing, coming from that background. I can have conversations with people where I understand what they're doing. I might not be able to do it anymore, but having those conversations and resonating, I think also helps candidates see that I'm taking an interest. I think that's a big thing from a recruiting standpoint, of knowing the role and knowing who you're talking to.
So I hear that you have a level of craft, understanding yourself because you've made things. You also love working with people. And I think one of the things that all three of us have in common is, we studied the arts, and that sort of inspired us to get into, the very different directions that we've taken before today. And I guess just to add my story, so I went to art school for undergrad, and I was actually a crafts glass major. But I although I did glass blowing, I mostly did kiln casting and ladle casting. And I think when I realized that what I wanted to do was not just be an artist, but to do something more with people, is I was part of this global organization called the Glass Arts Society, and we coordinated the annual conference in Amsterdam. And so my job as a student representative was to coordinate the coming together of glass students from all over the world to blow glass on the barges in the canals of Amsterdam. And I distinctly remember this moment of standing on the threshold of a building just outside the barges and looking and just thinking, wow, like through my ability to be part of this organization, we brought all these people together. And I just realized then that people was really the thing that I loved, and art is sort of like a conduit to bring people together. But also I think I realized as the three of us talk that like design is a really broad church, right? Like, even earlier in my career, like we would be looking for people from anthropology backgrounds, sociology backgrounds, information architecture, learning, graphic design, things like that. So yeah, I think that kind of leads on to talk a little bit about the bringing together that the three of us did of talent when we were at Facebook in the earlier days in London, which may be confusing for some folks who are listening because I have an American accent, Melissa has an American accent, and Kelly has a British accent. So maybe we could talk about how we all sort of came together in those early days of London as a site for Facebook.
The Facebook story and the Facebook London story really starts with you. And then Kelly and I kind of appear on the scene as new characters introduced in the course of the story, right? So,
Okay.
how did you land in London, Meg?
So flash forward after graduating from art school, and I similarly to the two of you, I sort of went through like, well, what am I going to do next moment? And you know, when you're a glass artist, you have to have access to like 100,000 plus dollar studios to be able to just create the art and then sustain yourself. But by that point, I really realized I love bringing people closer together. So after 10 years of working in the arts and culture organizations in the States, like the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the New Orleans Ballet Association, I got into tech recruiting, and I did that for about 10 or 15 years. So I hired for places like Siemens, eBay, and also like smaller startups. Facebook tapped me on the shoulder to come to London, and this was back in 2015. So they were building products for the first time outside of the US. And one of the things that was really compelling to me is I think at that time, over 85% of the people that use Facebook's products lived outside of the US. And so it was really meaningful to start building technology in places that reflected more of the diversity of the people who were using the products. So I came over with two other folks from Facebook HQ. I had never worked for a big tech company before, so this was a pretty new adventure. So landed on my first day, and I remember saying to my manager, great. So, we're going to be hiring the first designers outside of the US. Where do we get started? And she said, no, Meg, you're here to tell us that. Like, you're here to help build that. And I was like, wow, this is a completely different organization than what I've worked in before, which was more like hierarchical and, you sort of worked your way up. And it was just such a breath of fresh air, like exciting, but also a bit terrifying. And so, yeah, so there were, I think, 4 designers in the London office at that time. And I think 3 of them were what we call visa orphans. So like they were meant to be hired in the US, but because of visa issues, they were being held there. So they were working on projects that were rooted in the States. And the goal was to build out a completely autonomous site where they didn't have to be reliant on the US. So in the early days, everything was really scrappy. It was myself and a couple other designers, and we just brought in designers, did interviews, and sort of rinse and repeat. And so I think that scrappy process got us so far. But it was slow, right? It was slow moving, and each individual person, we had to like really just take so much time to sort through what the interview process was going to look like and things like that. So I think when the two of you came on, we were at an inflection point, and sort of, going from crucible where we figure everything out to, okay, now how are we going to grow really quickly? So I guess what I'm curious then, Kelly, did you join next before Melissa? I can't remember.
I believe so. I joined in 2016, I think. So yeah, not too long after yourself. The funny thing is, I'm remembering now, I actually initially interviewed to work on design. So I was supposed to partner with you, Meg, as like a for product design. And I got midway through the interview process, and then they started talking about analytics, and I was like, excuse me. And obviously I'm adaptable, and I really like the idea of meta. But so when I joined, I didn't have that understanding or knowledge of what was happening in product design, because my focus had to be building out data engineering from scratch as well. So it wasn't just around how do we scale product design, but how do we scale product? How do we scale tech? in London. And that was very, very new for Meta, then Facebook. Where do you find the talent? How, and again, this for me, I had worked on some engineering roles, but I'd never touched data. So I had to learn about an entirely new industry, alongside just adapting to this whole new environment, and of where I would say you were more of an owner than perhaps when I was at Microsoft. Everything was like, here's what you do, here's what, like, you're told everything. And I think it was great to have at the start that small team where it was yourself, Meg, me, and maybe like less than five people on kind of what you would consider product recruiting. You could take a little bit more of a risk in terms of how you approached problems. And I think what I really valued about that was the business partnership as well. Again, I wasn't in design yet, but even from a tech perspective, you could tell that everyone wanted the same outcome. They wanted to make the London site successful. And they were always there to support. I was very fortunate that Meg, you and I were on the same team, and we were able to kind of collaborate quite closely and even partner with one another on some non-design related things. So yeah, I think my story was more, how do I take this leap into something completely different, without necessarily realizing that it was going to lead back to ultimately where I wanted to be. Back in design. And I knew when you joined, Melissa, I knew of you. I think it was
that's terrifying.
In a really you were one, again, I was someone who at that point, I think I'd only had a few years of experience in recruiting. I liked to give off the confidence and experience this, like, I know what I'm doing, but equally you meet people who have all of this experience around what you're trying to hire for, and it is like, will I impress them? Will I be able to stand at that level and not completely cave in and not know what I'm talking about? So it was admiration, Melissa, just to be very clear. And
I'm glad you think I thought I knew what I was doing.
You what was your story of coming in and then working with us?
So I started working at Meta, at the time Facebook, in 2014 in Silicon Valley, out of the Menlo Park office. And I started as a product design manager there. And it was really my first exposure to hiring at scale. My previous exposures to hiring were as an interviewer at Apple, and then at the startup that I was at in between Apple and Meta as the hiring manager, but we had one person to hire, right? And we had no machinery, no process, no anything. When I got to Facebook in 2014, hiring wasn't perfect, but they had already hit the point where they needed to hire designers in the 10s to 20s to 30s range every year. And so they had to figure out a process and a way of evaluating designers and a way of trying to make things work at scale when you've got a large pool of interviewers, a large pool of hiring managers, and a large set of roles that needed to be filled in a way that was very efficient. So stepping into that, one of the first things they do is they get you trained as an interviewer. So there were a set of criteria, hard and soft skills, and those terms are imperfect, but let's use them for the moment. If we think about hard skills as like the technical aspects that you need to be successful as a designer, and the soft skills are more of the behavioral traits that make you successful in a particular circumstance. So I had never been exposed to that kind of evaluation methodology. Like, let's look at 6 specific criteria that we're thinking of and evaluate every candidate against the same things. And then getting exposed to structured interviewing, where every candidate on an interview loop would come in, give a presentation, do a critique, do a background interview where we're talking through their, like we're one-to-one talking through their experience in their portfolio, and then do a problem solving exercise on the whiteboard. So that was all wonderful and new. And I love systems. Like I love figuring out both why you're getting results that are of a particular flavor with a system, and how to modify or create and build a system that will get you the results that you want to get. For some reason, my little nerd brain just really loves that type of optimization problem and understanding that it requires to do that. And by golly, this was a system. But it was a system that was still very focused on people. And that was exciting too, because I am not a robot. I love people, and I love interacting with people, and I love helping people in various ways. And one of them is like, I want a hiring manager to have a great person to work with. I want a great person to work with to find a great hiring manager and to get excited about their career. And so very quickly, I found that aspect exciting, and I started to volunteer to do more at the Silicon Valley operation to attract candidates, to talk to candidates. I actually went on a couple of trips to try to meet candidates in different markets that we hadn't really tapped into. So I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. I went on a trip, and I worked with a recruiter to pick out candidates off of LinkedIn that seemed like they might be potential fits, reached out to them cold, said, you want to have a coffee? I'm in DC next week. And managed to get some hires, some of whom I think are actually still there. So it was a really exciting time to learn about how all of this works. So then fast forward to January of 2017, I think, when for life reasons, my husband and I moved to London. And fortunately, Meta was like, well, we could use a design manager in London. That could be fine. And at the time when I arranged to move to London with Meta, I mean, this is a little bit orthogonal, but it gives you a sense of the scaling that was happening at Meta at the time. I was moving teams. I was moving from community growth to ads and business platform. And there was one team of 4 designers that needed a design manager in London. And this is all arranged in November. We're arranging my visa and everything. And then by December, I get a call from the leader of ads and business platform that says, actually, can you take a second team? So before I even got to London on the ground, my team had gone from 4 to 10. So this is the kind of scale problem that we were operating with. And I believe that 2017 also was the first year that we had like a double-digit hiring target, Meg, to hire more designers into London too.
Yes. And at that point, we were also hiring in Tel Aviv. And I know you had managed that team at different points while you were at Meta too. So when you said about the fact that your team grew significantly before you even joined, it reminded me that when I landed in London, that first week they said, oh, yes, and you're also going to be hiring for our Tel Aviv office where I had never been. And you're going there in 3 weeks and you're going to be building out that team as well. And I was like, no big deal. Just no big deal. But just the level of trust and just the level of like, okay, this is happening. It's growing fast. So it sounds like your role was evolving even as you were moving internationally.
Yeah. And within 6 months, I had a 3rd team reporting to me in London. Like it was a little bit nuts. But also exhilarating, and definitely one of those you're going to learn really, really fast. And then I think it was 2017 where we first got to work together really closely, not just on hiring, but also figuring out the hiring system in London.
And how different it was from the States.
Totally different.
And how different the market was.
So different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think on the ground, when I was still in Menlo Park, I thought, a designer is a designer, like hiring is hiring, right? And that is definitely not true. Between the US and EMEA, the talent pool is different. The way that companies tend to arrange themselves is different. So you have different titles and different sets of experiences. You have differently shaped designers, to put it in a weird visual way.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes design is not as mature as like the design discipline is not often as mature in companies. And so it's like, how do you separate out the fact that designers may have a lot of aptitude, but they have not had a lot of opportunity to exercise that because product management or engineering is more dominant in those spaces. And so like, how do we measure that appropriately in the structures that we use to assess talent?
And the combination of less exposure to more exposure to the executional aspects of design, like interaction design and visual design, less exposure to that strategic product thinking and identifying the problems that could potentially be solved to create a valuable product. That was one piece. The second piece is that almost most of the companies in EMEA are business to business. There's not a whole lot of business to consumer companies building consumer focused software. And of course, big chunks of Meta are consumer focused, and a lot of the design ethos and interviewing process came with an assumption of consumer focused
And computer focused.
Yeah, that too, yes. Consumer focused product design. And so that required a mental shift because you're not seeing the same type of books, the same type of portfolio. You're not actually seeing the same types of product thinking because you have to think about that balance of, well, in business to business software, your buyer is almost never your user. Whereas with consumer software, your buyer is your user, if you use that metaphor. So it required a different shift. What did you guys have to do when you're working? A lot of times you're probably working with groups in the US to try to hire for their London outposts. How did you try to get around that market difference? What did you have to do?
I found transparency was what helped from my perspective. Never putting this is hard, this is difficult spin on it, but more like just making everyone aware. Because I think when you first start going into it, there's this big picture of we've had success hiring in Menlo Park and the just general US. How is it that you're struggling? And I think that when that rhetoric began of like, why are we not necessarily hiring as quickly, or as the caliber is not there, really using data. And it's something that I know from my side of things, I really enjoy finding out the insights of the why. So for me, it was assessing the market, actually looking at where was the talent coming from. For example, like product design didn't exist in EMEA or APAC for years after it did in the US. You had to look much deeper into what a UX UI designer was, or if someone called themselves, title soup. It's you're a visual designer, you're an interaction designer, you're a specialist designer. What does that mean? So really showing that to the business and giving a clear representation of, this is the market that you have. These are the skill sets that we are seeing. This is how we're actually going to need to adapt, not change the process, because what we didn't want to do is say we're hiring, and again, this, you hear it a lot in tech, we're lowering the bar. We never wanted to lower any bar, but we needed to be able to show, here is what the representation is. And if you truly want this team to be in London, we need to start looking at different profile types and how they can actually impact at a large tech company. So data for me was the biggest thing. And it's showing up, I think, is another thing. And again, when I was an individual contributor working on roles, showing my working, showing who I was reaching out to, working directly with the business to say, what do you think of this profile? tell me why they're good, tell me why they're not, tell me why you wouldn't have picked this person, so that I know what I'm assessing. And then it might also be it might be me, but being combative when necessary. I will stand up for a candidate if I believe your opinion of just what they have on paper is wrong. So building that trust, I think, is critical. How you hire designers is not just based on the designer themselves, but how you are as a recruiter and how you are as a recruiting team. So that partnership, and being able to not make an assumption that because, Melissa, yourself, you are fantastic at what you do, I shouldn't assume that you know what I do. And I think that is that's the critical thing for me. Showing, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm working on, here's the data. You will now formulate what you need based on that.
I agree with that so much. And it reminds me of just that mentality shift, I think, especially as recruiters, from service providers to true partners. And part of that is being able to articulate that data and make informed decisions and also recommendations. And we were all learning together at that point too, right? So it was like, even though everything was a well-oiled machine in a lot of ways in the States, it was still very much, we were like learning and iterating. And so, Melissa, you were asking a little bit about like, how did you communicate with some of the folks? And like, oh gosh, I remember, when we flew to Tel Aviv, like after the first 3 weeks I was there, and I met Luke Woods, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm meeting the top brass. And then, you're reporting up to like Julie Zhu and Melissa Stewart and Tom Hobbs. And it's just like, wow, okay, I need to be on top of my stuff. And I need to really like be coming to them with like information that's helpful for us to together make these decisions. And so I don't know, I remember this one piece of data that I was doing research, and I was just saying, why is the market so different over here than in the States? And one of the things was, if you took some back of the napkin math, but if you took the number of designers per capita in the Bay and compared it to the number of designers per capita in London, if you walked into a coffee shop in the Bay, 1 in 40 people would be a designer. So, likely in the course of your day, you're going to encounter some designers. It would take 1 in, I think, 2,500 people in London to have that same encounter. So it just was a very different market. And then when you look at how candidates understand design and the design interview process, in the Bay, everybody was doing whiteboarding exercises, and, they were really sharp at like, how we market ourselves. And that's maybe also a very American thing, is like, you're constantly sort of in a selling mode. So understanding that it's okay that it's not that way here, and how do we help people to show up as their best selves in a way that the hiring manager can get the signal on the candidate. And so one of the things that we implemented to help that, and I think, Kelly, we probably did this on various different teams, but we started doing prep chats for designers before they did their interviews. And that was not to give them a leg up. It was just to give them the opportunity to access some of the knowledge that people in the Bay it was second nature, right? So things like, using data and research to represent your ideas. We're not giving them the answers, but we're saying, this is the format in which we would like to see how you evaluate KPIs, how you measure the success of the design work that you're doing, and things like that. So those are some of the things that come to my mind. But as we evolved, we definitely got super sharp on the metrics. And that was something that I think, Melissa, you helped us with pretty significantly. Might you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to add one more point to what you were just saying about that training program. Well, not training, prep chats that I think one of the reasons why interviewing is a skill. It's a skill. And especially Silicon Valley style interviews, they are really hard. And there is a way of speaking and a way of behaving in those interviews that's sort of expected. And if you've never been exposed to that, of course you don't know how to do it. So I think the process of being able to help educate people on what they're going into really matters. And it doesn't change their design skills. But it gives them a sense of the type of environment they're about to encounter in those on-site interviews, which it makes a big difference. Okay, so you were asking about data. And Kelly, you were saying about it as well. And what I remember was in that my first year in London in 2017, when we had to hire, I think we had to hire something like 12 or 15 designers, which doesn't sound like that much, but it was like the biggest number we'd ever had to hire in London. And I think by the middle of the summer, we knew we were in trouble because I think the stats were something like, I'm sorry, I'm dredging these things up from my brain. It was like
14%. Yeah, 14% of people who interviewed got an offer.
Yeah. So roughly, like, that means you're going to conduct 10 interviews and you're going to hire 1.4 people, and you can't actually hire 0.4 of a person. So that's a problem. And it's a huge toll on the teams that are doing the interviewing, because I think interviewing is its own job. And if you're trying to do it at volume, and we didn't have that many designers around.
So they had to do all the interviews.
Yeah, it was a huge tax on people. People would be spending an average of like 5 to 10 hours a week interviewing. So that's like a fifth of your time per week. So we really needed to solve that efficiency problem, both to hire the people that we needed to hire and also to reduce the tax on the interviewing teams. And I remember being in conversations with loads of people, and most of the designers in London were relatively new. And so they had been relatively recently trained as interviewers. And the general blanket assumption was that the problem that we were experiencing was because we had all those new interviewers. So clearly these interviewers are passing people through our initial screens that just aren't qualified for the job. But I had been on both sides of the equation, both like I was an interviewer, and I had done a ton of interviewing in Menlo Park and also in London. But also I had this unique role in Meta called the debrief lead role, which is someone who, for every candidate that we talk to, we sit down with the interviewers and we do it around the room to discuss the feedback for the candidate. And the debrief lead, not the interviewers, is responsible for deciding whether this candidate meets the hiring criteria and should have an offer extended to them. So I had seen lots of interviewers in the way they were assessing candidates, and I had been an interviewer assessing candidates myself. And I just didn't buy that explanation of what was going on. Like, it felt like there was something deeper and more systematic going on. So you and I sat down, and I had you grab all of the interview packets for all of the candidates that we had interviewed from like 2016 through 2017, which is something like 40 candidates.
Yeah, we did an audit.
Yeah, it was a big spreadsheet. And because I am who I am, I color coded it. And it was the only way I could make any sense of it. And the color coding helped me look for trends. And it helped me look for trends by candidate, by interviewer. And also I started taking notes as I went through and read every single one of those packets, every single interviewer's feedback for every single candidate. And it was tedious, but it was also completely eye-opening, because it wasn't that it was just a few interviewers who were passing through candidates, but we were passing unqualified candidates through initials, and those people were getting all no hires when they came in for their full interview loop. But it wasn't because of untrained interviewers. Almost every single one of those unqualified candidates had a highly trained person on the initials. And then the second thing that was happening was that we were landing on no hire decisions for people who were probably actually qualified to do the job.
Yeah, I remember that. That was frustrating when you're the recruiter and you have your own metrics and goals to hit.
Well, and you're watching these interviewers and probably being like, that doesn't sound right. Like, I've met this candidate, I've seen their work, like that just doesn't doesn't sound quite, you know. So here's what was going on. In initials, interviewers, even highly qualified interviewers who had done hundreds of interviews, they wanted to give people a chance.
Yeah.
They were willing to see potential, and they were willing to pass through people who weren't quite meeting the hard skill criteria. But then when it came to on-site interviews, those same interviewers were incredibly like they were expecting extreme seniority and highly specific domain expertise that the average designer coming on off the street is just not, it's not possible. You're not going to have that. And then there were other pieces where interviewers were really focusing on, we talked about the technical skills that you need and the behavioral skills that you need to be able to be successful in a role. There were interviewers who were focusing solely on behavioral skills in, for example, the portfolio review phase of a candidate, because they thought that somebody else had already decided that this person's portfolio was good enough.
Yeah.
And maybe to demystify or to just footnote there that I still have it emblazoned in my mind that the hard skills at the time were product thinking, interaction design, and visual design. And the soft skills were intentionality, self-awareness, and proactivity and drive.
That's right. Yeah. And then there were other instances of just like bad, what I would call bad interview hygiene, where if you're reviewing a project with a candidate, you don't get the specifics of what the candidate actually did, and they forget to tell you, or like what the team around them was. So you don't actually, you can't disambiguate whether these visuals in this project, did this candidate actually do that, or were they working with a visual designer? And then the worst part was that we had these pretty senior people interviewing candidates, and they were using themselves as the hiring bar. So this person who has 15 years of experience designing consumer software and is deep in the understanding of how messaging, social media, ad technology, you name it, deep in the domain understanding, they were expecting the exact same qualifications from the candidate that they're meeting. And they're not doing a good job of like really assessing those skills. Do they know what a valuable product is, regardless of what the domain is? Are they able to build coherent and easy to use and accessible interfaces on different platforms, regardless of what the domain was? And can they design a visually coherent interface? Like, they weren't focusing on those things. They were instead expecting skills that were on par with their own. And this completely opened my mind to, again, how all these systems get built, like the interviewing system, and how your system is perfectly designed for the results that you're getting. So whenever I'm talking to clients, like I work with a lot of startups or like scale ups who are trying to hire designers. And whenever they're saying that they can't hire, I want to see the data. Like, I want to see your interview packets. Show me what you actually have. Don't make assumptions about what's going wrong. Let's find out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember one of the things that we tried, I can't remember if this was the first iteration or if this was a later iteration, because that year it seemed like, how are we possibly going to hire 12 or 20 designers or whatever it was? And then in subsequent years, we had to hire like 50 or 75. And so
crazy.
And so, I mean, I think when we all left there, the international design team outside of the US was over 700 people across, remotely throughout EMEA, on site in London, Amsterdam, Tel Aviv, and Singapore, and even a couple designers in Lagos and Seoul when Kelly was managing the team. But I remember one of the things that we did was, sort of counterintuitively, we said, actually, we need to be stricter on the initial interviews because that will yield a higher conversion rate on the final interviews. And so like doing that titration, it felt like this is going to be so much harder, but it actually ended up being much more efficient use of everyone's time. And so we ended up, I think it was two of the design managers that were there at the time helped to we did a prep. with all of the US based interviewers. And then we brought them in and had them start to do the initial interviews. So then we could really use the folks on site in London who were more senior, like yourself, to Melissa, to do the final interviews. And then that really helped turn around our conversion rates, didn't it?
Yeah. We should probably mention like what the interview process was that we were dealing with here, because we're talking about like initials and on-site, and you and I know, like, we lived and breathed that, but not everybody else has. So initials, so there were 2 interviews aside from a recruiter screen that candidates needed to pass in order to get to a full proper interview loop. So there was a background interview where a design manager or someone who qualified would sit with the candidate and like talk through some of the projects from their portfolio. And it didn't need to be as polished, like a polished portfolio presentation necessarily, although sometimes it was. And that would assess some of those hard skills and see whether this candidate's work was really relevant. And then the second was a critique, an app critique, where, and this was all done remotely, it was all done on video calls. So where the interviewer and the interviewee would sit down and critique an app together from the interviewee's phone. And in order to pass that, then you get into that big loop where you have a formal portfolio presentation where you're presenting to all of your interviewers and probably a couple of hiring managers, and then a background interview where you're going in more depth on some of the design decisions you made on your portfolio projects, another critique, and then the problem solving exercise where you're working together on a whiteboard or a Miro board or something like that to talk through a product problem that gives us insight into the way that you think about products and the way that you reason and the way that you make assumptions and build designs on top of them. So obviously initials take a lot less time than that full process where there's a lot more people involved and there's a lot more time invested. Saving time up front by being tighter on the initials makes a huge difference in the long run. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think at our peak, the conversion rates, I think it was around 40% of the final interview to offer, which was, I mean, glorious. But then I think it settled around more of the industry standard, which was maybe 25 to 30, to 30%. And then I think, Kelly, when you were leading a team, there's so many recruiters. And so at any given time, you're training new recruiters, but you also have senior recruiters. So how do you think about numbers when you have so many disparate factors that are going into how you manage your team, and also then the numbers of the larger design org and how they're coming into the interview process?
I think this is where it was quite interesting to hear, because again, at the time when I first joined Meta, I wasn't working on design. So hearing some of these issues that were happening back in like 2016, 2017, Melissa, you and I, and Meg as well, we started seeing them again appearing towards that 2021, 2022. But you had this other factor suddenly come in, which was the recruiting team scaled. We went from 6 people in design to, I think by the time we had kind of, just before we left, it was 25 in a single design recruiting team across, this was in Singapore, Tel Aviv and London. So now you're having to factor in, is it me? Is it us? Are we the problem? Or are we seeing, actually, we've hired so many designers, and once again, we're calibrating new designers to interview. Are we seeing a trend and a repeat of exactly what happened before? Our conversions are dropping, but is it the fact that we're not putting the right profiles in? So some of the things that I had to look into was, again, separating that out. And Melissa, you were fantastic at helping us to look again at that process, and are the interviewers kind of doing their job? Because again, new people, it takes time to ramp. And from our side within the recruiting piece, it was looking at how we can upskill. There's actually a much smaller proportion of design-centric recruiters in an industry. So as much as we were trying to find people who had a background in product design or design of any kind, we started to have to look at hiring people that were more of a creative, like they wanted to get into design, or they'd had a little bit of experience, but nothing to the scale that we had at Meta. So we had to think about, how do we teach them? And there was a lot. I love a playbook. I love writing. A lot of it came down to just training guides and kind of getting thoughts on paper and getting process on paper. But you can't you can't expect, again, I think just before we left, it was over 100 designers that we were given from a targeting perspective to hire.
Totally nuts.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
10 to 100 over very little years. But I will say it's brilliant that there was that investment. Like they saw the not only the need, but the potential of what we could do. So over those years of recruiting designers, it was great to get some of that recognition that, we are capable of hiring these people. But with that, you can't stop a recruiting team from recruiting by also trying to train them at the same time. Like there's a clear balance. So this is where we found like partnership with designers to be fundamental. We created a buddy system. So for every sourcer or recruiter, you had a designer that you could sit with, and the expectation was relatively low. We didn't want to add any more complexity to designers' time when we're also asking them to interview, but a simple maybe hour a week where you might just review portfolios together. You might help them understand if, you've had a really tough recruiter screen and you can't decide if it's right or not. Sit with your designer and run through why you like them, why you didn't, where your hesitations are. And we started to see that the more people were interacting with designers, it took time, but there was almost a click. They understood a little bit more about what we needed to hire for. And we did other things like business acumen sessions, because it's not just about, adding to the complexity. We're not just hiring great designers, but we might actually need a designer with a specific skill set. Oh, you have to have ads experience, or we're hiring for Instagram or WhatsApp. So let's look at nuanced. WhatsApp were very, very focused on visual. Now there's a different assessment criteria when you're looking at a profile, but also how do you understand selling of the different teams when you are hiring across so many different ones at scale. So helping the recruiting team to get to know the business a little bit more, and even down to the basics of what do you do, what is great. We have Instagram in London. Which part?
Because what is creator monetization? What are NFTs?
What do those words even mean?
Yeah.
What is a metaverse? And how do we hire a designer to make one?
It was an intense time, and I think being able to skill build with the help of the product design team was hugely beneficial to the success and being able to kind of edge towards achieving those numbers.
I think it was like, as you say that, Kelly, I really think it's like PhD level design recruiting, right? Like we were able to sit down with folks like Melissa and just like some of the best designers in the world and critique our own work, right? And get better at it. And I guess just for the audience, some of the things that some of the data points that we would track just to give like a sense would be, you could do conversion rates by interview type by recruiter. You could do conversion rates by interview type by interviewer. So by the designers, by site, by team type, by location, by discipline, and use all that information to really constantly just like hone and make better and do learnings from. Now, I recognize that not everyone is going to have the opportunity to have a specialized design recruiter or to have the tooling that can give them those metrics. So I think, part of what we do as we work together now as part of Good Maven is how do we bring this kind of world-class expertise to inform startup teams? We've hired for, founding designers for pre-seed startups, A, B, and C series, and also larger companies like AT&T and Monday.com and things like that. So I guess I'm curious for both of you, like, how do you look at this, massive tool set that you have to bring to bear to hiring, and how do you sort of like look at each individual situation and assess, okay, how and what is needed here to help?
Maybe we should start from the hiring manager side. Since that's where it all starts, right? I think there are a couple of things happening right now in the industry, which is one, companies are hiring designers again. Great.
Yay.
Hooray. Hooray for everyone. But there's still, when you get a rec, when you are able to start hiring, usually you've got one, maybe two, right? So, and you maybe don't have the kind of money that you actually want to spend for that rec. Maybe you do. More often you don't. So that really, we've been talking about these scenarios where we had so many designers to hire. When you have one or two designers to hire, and those hires really, really, really matter to the trajectory of your company, it really pressurizes the hire. And unfortunately, I think the natural reaction from a hiring manager is to want a unicorn. You want somebody who does it all soup to nuts and has done it before many times, exactly the way you need them to do it at your company. Whether that's they've built exactly this type of product, fintech, whatever, to the exact types of design, you want to see that in their portfolio. So extreme conservatism, right? But that's actually not necessarily a pathway to success because it's very outward looking. It's not actually looking at what you have at your company in your team. What resources do you actually have, and what gaps do you really need to fill? What can you coach, and what is it absolutely essential that when that person lands on the ground, they need to be able to do independently and quickly, right? And often in these situations, we've got that team usually does have somebody who's thinking about the product and who has at least some understanding of what makes a valuable product. But what they don't have is somebody who can actually do really strong interaction design, visual design execution for the product. And so it's essential that they hire someone with those executional skills who can grow into some of the product aspects, right? That's one example. But I think it really, if you're going to hire responsibly in a tight environment as a hiring manager, you have to really think about the profile of designer that you need and what you're willing to trade off against, because unicorns, they don't really exist. They sort of exist, but you know what? They have a choice. They can work wherever they want and they can name their fee. And so they're really, really hard to attract. And if you want to be hiring for a year before you find that unicorn who's willing to come work for you, fine. But chances are you probably need someone sooner. So you have to in order to make a good hire, you have to have a grip on what you actually already have on the team, and what you're willing to trade off against.
Yeah, well put. And I think, the strange thing about the market is you'd think it would be easier to hire now because there are so many more designers. I mean, I remember back in the early 2000s when I was first hiring designers and they weren't even called product designers. And it was like, if you could find anyone who knew their way around an interface, that was it. They were hired. It's so different now. There are thousands of designers who are looking for work and who want to find that good match. But to your point, Melissa, we're seeing a lot more conservatism around that and specificity. So they want folks who have solved exactly the same problem, although maybe someone who's solved a similar problem that is much more complex, but in a different domain, might actually be able to apply that knowledge to differentiate or to innovate in a way that could be even more useful to your company than sort of like doing it the same way as it's done before. How are you experiencing it? Oh, sorry, go on.
I wanted to ask the two of you, though, one of the things that I know that's happening right now in this hiring environment is that for every job posting, recruiters and managers are getting inundated by applications. So how is that changing both what you're doing and how you're working with the hiring managers that are your clients?
It's a really good question. I think Meg said it there. There's so many more designers in the market that are looking for work, and it's unfortunate that we can't always help everyone. We don't have enough roles for everyone. I think being really, it comes two sides for me. One is that, we're seeing, we're being inundated with applications, but kind of taking time it takes a lot of time to look through those applications. When we're getting 200, 300, 400 people applying for a single role, recruiting has to take a stance of what is our bare minimum that we are looking for a role, and then how do we pull from the applications that we have the minimum viable expectation, and then making sure that we're presenting those candidates to the hiring teams, so that there is that kind of because there's two aspects of recruiting, right? There's the passive outreach, the ones who we go after, those unicorns that we're going to be chasing our tails, to be honest. A lot of the time we don't get responses. When we do, great, but they're normally not interested. So having that balance between active, so people who are coming to us and really kind of wanting it, and they're hungry for it, but we still have an expectation of meeting the requirements of the role. So understanding that we can have a baseline. So these are the hard skills that we can't not lose, but maybe we can grow into some of those behaviorals, or maybe it's vice versa. You don't have to be as strong visually, but the role means that, like from a UX kind of or an interaction perspective, there's no way around that piece. As long as you are self-aware and you have proactivity, you can grow and learn. So giving applications a shot, but knowing, personally I like helping people, but I can't get to everyone. And that's a really hard thing for me to have to admit to, that not everyone is going to be right for a role. But now trying to narrow down my focus to at least present some applicants that have that meet the recommended criteria for the role. I don't know if that's a good answer.
I agree with you, Kelly. I mean, I think, but all three of us got into the work that we do in part because we love people and we like to help people get where they're going, right? And to support them through that. So I think some of the things that the three of us have evolved together to offer to candidates may be like DIY info on our blog, right? Or doing this podcast here, right? Like how do we demystify some of the secrets behind hiring and make it more easily accessible to folks so that they can use that in their own searches, whether it's through a client that we're hiring or whether it's for something else. We do also offer coaching throughout the life of a designer. So we have everyone from like more junior level designers who work with Melissa or our other coach Timothy on things like hard skills and, how to get better at design, through to like senior leaders who want to get better at cross-functional influence, or how do they grow their career? How do they get better at communicating? How do they develop their product thinking and things like that? And also, how do we make the market more accessible for folks coming from underrepresented backgrounds? So we've done posts on how to find and hire Black and brown designers, LGBTQIA plus designers, and things like that. So that work is just getting started, and I think we'll be there for the rest of our careers. But I realize that we can easily fill an hour together, and at some point we'll need to sort of close our conversation. So I guess I would love to finish up by asking both of you, what are you excited about today in terms of the industry? I mean, there's a lot of change happening with AI. The market is a little bit tumultuous, but I feel like we're seeing, a lot of hiring happening, a lot of coaching that we're doing. So yeah, for each of you, what would you say you're most excited about?
Kelly, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I think it's a couple of things. One, we spoke to, more people are hiring now. There is, and again, whether that be good from a Good Maven standpoint or just personally, it means that we actually get to help people, and we see so many in need of their next opportunity. I'm excited to find roles for them. But equally, I'm also working on kind of leadership and exec hiring at the moment. So when you have someone who's investing in senior leadership at some of these kind of smaller and larger kind of enterprise tech startup, like whatever industry it sits within, you're investing in senior leadership in the hope that that team can then scale. And then you can look at, okay, we're trying to grow our products, and ultimately that does mean we're going to need to scale our teams, and we're going to need to bring in more talent. And after the last few years, I think seeing that change, and it's not I'm not here to say that it's going to get back on track and suddenly we're going to see the same volume of hiring that perhaps we did 3-4 years ago, but to see a trend of people being aware that they need to grow and to hire, that's what I'm looking forward to. It's not specifically about what tech is coming and AI, but for me, it's just the growth opportunities that we're starting to see.
I think Kelly covered the hiring market and the team growth market really well, and I would agree that I'm quite excited about that too. So I'll take a slightly different tack. I'll take the practice of design and the practice of software design. Obviously, we're at quite an inflection point with the technology industry today, and with what AI is going to be able to do for product design. And there are a lot of people who are frightened of it because they think it's going to eliminate some jobs, and that may well be true. But I'm quite excited about it because there's a lot of the role of product design that is kind of block and tackle. Or like a friend of mine used to call it making license plates. Like you're just stamping out another registration flow, guys. Here we go. Some more error messages for this particular really annoying edge case that I've seen 16 times before, but it's a different product. So I need to make those dialog boxes and write all those strings, right? So there's a lot of aspects of the product design role that can be repetitious, not particularly exciting, but need to be done well enough because they really matter they're kind of the glue for the way products work today. And I think that AI is going to help us do those better, faster, so that we can focus on the things that actually make products good. So your registration, like your sign up flow or login flow, is not the thing that is going to make or break your product, although it does have an influence. Don't get me wrong. I spent time in the growth team. But what really matters is the value exchange that your product brings between the business and the person who's using it, right? And if a lot of people can make products easily, good registration flow, fine, that's all done. Now we have more time to focus on what actually makes a great product great, and to really hone in on that. What makes a great product differentiated from other products in the market, and to spend our time where it really matters, as opposed to on all these other things that have to get done, like doing the laundry. So I see AI as a labor-saving device for design, and I am excited to see designers grow in new ways when they can spend their time less on doing the laundry and more on the stuff that really matters for product. So that's what I'm really excited about.
I guess what I'm excited about is that, this is a little bit of new and uncharted territory. So, I feel a little bit like Granny Recruiter Meg when I talk about when I started hiring in the early 2000s, right? And it was like, I remember hiring for Comcast, and it was like, what would it be like to have TV on the internet, right? And now that's just a very normal part of everyday life for us, that we would have access to these wonderful services. And so I think there will be new questions that we'll need to confront as technology changes how we interact with products. And some of those questions will be around ethics and, what's the healthiest way to use these technologies, and what's the what's the most the ethical way. And so I think that's where we, as folks who hire and coach talent, have a huge opportunity and also a responsibility to be aware of and coach in the direction of positive impact and positive results, right? So I think that's just a natural orientation we have in the values and the way that we work. And it's something that there's not a guidebook for, right? So it's something that we'll be all figuring out together. So I'm excited and also curious about that aspect of things. Well, I think with that, I just want to thank both of you so much. I mean, it's a joy to work with you, but it's also even more of a joy to talk with you and hear a little bit about your journeys and your wisdom. So thank you for bringing that today.
It's such a treat to be able to continue to work with both of you. I mean, when I left Meta, I was going off and taking a big leap off into the big wide open. But here it's like being able to work with people that I know and trust and that we're friends. Mm-hmm. And it makes every day when we get to work together really great. So thanks for that, Meg.
You're welcome.
+1 is all I can say.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. We hope you got some valuable information from our conversation. And for more career tips and insights, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Substack, or visit us anytime at goodmaven.com. We look forward to sharing more with you next time.